Hi, everybody. This is your week 6 lecture. I'm sorry this one's going up a little late. I'm not getting it up until Monday. Um, the reason for that is that yesterday I wrote out the PowerPoint, I recorded the lecture, then I realized there was a mistake in it, so I went back to record it again and realized that I had deleted the entire PowerPoint and got frustrated, and so now here I am with a recreated, not as good as the original one, PowerPoint, but anyway, it's better than nothing. So this week, I'm super bummed that we're not meeting because this play I just think is hilarious. I saved it for the middle of the quarter so that just when everybody's starting to lose steam and get burned out, we could read something like funny. And I also have a DVD of the 2002 film version of this play, and I was going to show it in class. I'll say a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but this would have been a fun one to discuss as a class and watch in class and have snacks and stuff. I mean, we can all do that in a socially distanced way from our houses, respectively, and then talk about it, but it's just not the same, you know? So, a little background about this. This is a play, The Importance of Being Earnest is a play by Oscar Wilde, and it takes place in like late 1800s England. Oscar Wilde, if you haven't read anything by him before, I hope you like this one because I just adore him. I think he's hilarious. I love everything I've read by him. I just think he's a fantastic writer, and everything that I've read by him is just delightful. So he was a British Victorian writer. He wrote fiction, poetry, and drama. The two works he's best known for are this, The Importance of Being Earnest, which is a play, and then The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a novel about a guy who, I mean, it's been so long since I read it, but I remember loving it. A guy who doesn't age, but a portrait of him ages, and then I think at the end it reverses and he dies, or I don't remember, but I shouldn't tell you that because it's a spoiler in case you want to read it. I don't actually remember how it ends because I have a terrible memory for plot, and it's been like 20 years since I read it. But if you like this one and you're looking for like a fun summer read, you might check that out because it's not very long and it's the same kind of writing style, that like witty, funny, you know, irreverent sense of humor, I guess. If you enjoy that, you'll like that novel too. So this is a play, as I mentioned a minute ago. I don't teach a lot of plays. I don't necessarily love reading plays. I love watching them. And this would have been a fun one for us to watch together, but we'll read it anyway. And then if you want to watch one of the films, if you can get a hold of it, I think it's on YouTube. I think you have to pay, but I put a couple of clips of the 2002 film up in our Canvas classroom so you can check those out just to get a sense of the tone of the play. I thought those would be helpful, even though they don't give you a lot of information about the play, to give you a sense of like the tone of it, just so that that sense of humor comes through as you're reading it. So you might watch those clips and just sort of imagine that kind of tone coming through as you're reading the play. Watch the whole thing if you want to, if you can find a way to do that. It's really a fun watch. It's a 2002 adaptation. It has Rupert Everett in it. You'll recognize him. Colin Firth, who's like the Mr. Darcy figure in, what is that movie called? Bridget Jones's Diary. And also the Mr. Darcy figure in the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. So he's in it. Dame Judi Dench is in it. And then Reese Witherspoon plays, I believe, Cicely Cardew. It's just really fun to watch. I could watch it a billion times and never get tired of it. So check that out if it's helpful. It's pretty faithful to the play too. I think the dialogue is identical to it. I don't think a whole lot of stuff is added in or left out. I think it's pretty faithful. So, you know, read it, but also maybe check that one out as well. What else? Oh yeah, so Oscar Wilde, I mean, he lived a sad life. He was sort of a relatively open, he was sort of relatively open about his homosexuality. I mean, he wasn't necessarily like as open about it as a person would be now or could be now in our country or in Britain. But people knew about his homosexuality, and he was actually imprisoned at a certain point for quote unquote lewd acts with men. Because I believe he lived with men, he had relationships with men, like long-term relationships with them. And at the time, this was illegal in Britain, and he was sent to prison for 2 years, man, for hard labor. And he was never quite the same after that. He lived a couple of years longer, and then he died of meningitis at the age of like 46. So sad. But he wrote all this cool stuff before he died, and now we can read it, and, you know, sad story. Introduction to the play, a little bit more about it. I mean, there's some kind of confusing bits in that it's one of those plays. I mean, there are Shakespearean plays like this where like everyone's pretending to be somebody else and everyone's in disguise and everyone is like, this is kind of one of those plays. It's referred to sometimes as like a farcical comedy. Parts of it are just super outrageous and hilarious. So it takes place in both London and also in the English countryside, as I mentioned, in the late 1800s. The characters, it can be a little hard to keep track of Algernon and Jack slash Ernest because both Algernon and Jack, who are the main characters and are best friends, pretend to be a guy named Ernest from time to time. And then there's some confusion that results from this among the ladies in the play, like Cecily and Gwendolyn and Lady Augusta and all that stuff. You'll see. And then there's this hilarious ending. Well, I won't spoil it for you. I so badly want to, but I'm not going to. There's a hilarious ending that has to do with the name Ernest and people pretending to be Ernest. And it's even made funnier by the fact that the term Ernest means both honest and also like it's a name. I mean, a person can be named Ernest. So when it's spelled E-A-R, that means like you're being truthful or honest. When it's E-R, it's just like a guy's name. So Algernon is this like dandy figure living in London. I mean, Oscar Wilde had a dandy figure in a lot of the stuff he wrote. So this is kind of a common, familiar character. If you've read other stuff by him, you'll notice this figure being familiar. So Algernon is this dandy, like a gentleman living in London. And when he doesn't want to do something, like somebody wants to hang out with him and he doesn't want to hang out with them, he all of a sudden gets real busy and has to go visit his sick invalid friend Bunbury in the country. And the name is kind of speculated about, like this Bunbury. I mean, it's not a real person, but people speculate about whether Oscar Wilde like had a friend when he was young who was sickly named Bunbury, or whether it's a mashup of two words. And there are all kinds of different theories about this. But Algernon also once in a while pretends to be named Ernest as well. And then there's Jack, who's Algernon's best friend, and he is known to Algernon as Ernest. But then when he's in the country, he's known to Cecily, who he's like taking care of. He's like in charge of her, his ward. He's known to her as Jack. And so he's kind of living this double life, as is Algernon. They're both like living these double lives, and they discuss it and it becomes funny, and it's the nature of the farcical comedy here. So Cecily is Jack's ward. Jack's like the guardian of her, I guess. And also Cecily is Algernon's love interest. Did I spell Gwendolyn right there? Yeah, that's how they spell it in the play. Okay, I kept wanting to put a Y in it and then I was looking. So Gwendolyn is the love interest of Jack slash Ernest, but also she's Lady Bracknell's daughter, and she's kind of like a society lady, like a young society lady, whereas Cecily is like younger and more imaginative and kind of sillier. And then sillier, it's a technical term, Lady Augusta Bracknell, who's known as like Aunt Augusta to Algernon, she's this aristocratic society lady. She's Gwendolyn's mom, and she's also Algernon's aunt. So there are these like familial relationships in this play, but then there are also friend relationships, like Algernon and Jack are best friends. And anyway, you'll see. So the confusion that can like come up in this play results from both Algernon and Jack at various times pretending to be Ernest, and then Cecily and Gwendolyn being confused about who Ernest is when they're talking to each other about Ernest, because one thinks Ernest is this guy and the other thinks Ernest is this guy, and neither of them are really named Ernest, or are they? We'll find out. I just think it's so funny. I hope you like it as much as I do. The humor doesn't come through as well, I don't think, when you're reading it as when you're watching it, so if you can find a way to watch it, plays are meant to be watched. Darn it, I wish we could have watched this as a class together. So a lot of people find and have found homosexual subtext in this play. So the term Ernest, I mean, some of these are kind of a stretch, but the term Ernest, a lot of people say, I mean, it was a man's name, but it also was like a euphemism or a slang term in Victorian England for a homosexual man. I've read this in a lot of different places, and some people say that, Wilde did this intentionally, tongue-in-cheek, and a lot of people say, well, no, he didn't, and it was just an accident. And anyway, I kind of think he probably said it on purpose. He probably did it on purpose, like Cecily, this one's a little bit more of a stretch, but the name Cecily I was reading, I've read this in several places. I was reading it somewhere yesterday. Was it in a review of the play in the New York Times, or I don't remember? The name Cecily is both a woman's name, but also apparently, allegedly, it was a term in Victorian England, a slang term for a male prostitute. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're reading and kind of consider if, I mean, in the play, she's really a young lady, but consider if Wilde was like gesturing at, male homosexual relations, kind of what we could do with that. The cigarette case given to Jack, so Uncle Jack to Cecily, given to Uncle Jack by Cecily in the beginning of the play. It's referenced. Algernon notices it. Some people, this one might be even more of a stretch, but I've read in several places that the cigarette case kind of maybe was a gift that would have been given to like a young male prostitute. I don't know. Other things that you notice, I mean, you'll probably notice all kinds of things. Do you notice other things that are like not overtly referencing homosexual love or relationships, but maybe that are kind of, subtext? The word subtext works there. Under the surface of the text. Consider also, as you read, more pertinent to the class, gender roles in the play. So the reason I assigned this in the first place for this class, I mean, beyond the fact that I love it and I think it's hilarious and delightful, is that when I was reading up on it over the summer, when is this? What decade is this? What time of year is it? I don't know. I think I was reading up on it over winter break. Could have been spring break. Either way. I was reading up on this play at some point in the past. It all runs together now because of the quarantine. That I was reading journal articles about this. I went into the databases at GHC and I was looking at all kinds of different journal articles about the importance of being earnest when I was trying to decide whether I should assign it for this class, because it's about sexuality under the surface, but is it really about gender? And what I read made me decide to assign it in the class, because what I read was I started to notice that there wasn't really a critical consensus about whether gender in the play was sort of traditional or whether gender in the play was radical. Some people think one thing, some people think another thing. There's a lot of stuff that's been written about gender in the play, and a lot of critics think gender is important in the play, but the critics don't all agree on how it's important, whether Wilde is being maybe radical about gesturing at homosexual relationships, but maybe more conservative about gender roles, or whether he's being kind of radical about both. So I want you to think about it as you read or as you watch, or both. And then we can have a conversation about that in the class, because if the critics don't even know what to think, I certainly don't know what to think. I'm interested to hear what you have to say, and we can all discuss it. So that's your discussion question for the week. I think I've probably worded it a little bit differently in the discussion forum, but basically that's what I want you to think about as you read, among other things. And then that's what we'll discuss this week in the discussion forum. And again, I'm sorry we can't watch this together. I hope you still like it. I hope you have a good